So Morgan Housel, welcome back to Interintellect. We are so privileged to have you. You have this insane Taylor Swift Eras tour level schedule with your book. Everybody wants a piece of you. We all want to know what money is, how it works, and what to do with it. Your new book is, I think, your wisest to date. I felt like almost everything that you kind of held back on sharing in your other books or you merely kind of alluded to is full on. Like there's George Carlin here, Rubin is here, all our favorites are here. Of course, Buffett, Munger make cameos, and there are so many amazing snippets. I don't know how, and I would love to at some point during this conversation to hear a little bit about your research process and how you find these things because it's a bit like, oh, hey, there's this good sentence in Proust. And
Right.
when exactly did that happen during reading Proust?
Right.
That one great sentence came to you, like, oh, this will fit here. But that's maybe for another salon when we talk about writing. Today, we will talk a little bit about status and independence.
Yeah.
I felt
Great.
that this book primarily is about those things. But first, before we jump in, I would love to hear a little bit more, and maybe even more than you actually share in the book, about this idea or concept that is psychological wealth.
Yeah.
Comes back a couple of times. Just you call a person psychologically rich, your father-in-law, but the concept of psychological wealth. What is this, and how does it pop up in a book about how to spend money well?
Yeah. It's definitely a term that I just came up with, which means it's pretty nebulous, doesn't have a lot of firm definitions to it. But the idea that wealth is what you have minus what you want. Very simple. People have been talking about that for forever, but even though how simple it is, it tends to be very ignored in the financial community. 99.9% of the effort in the financial community is how do you get more? How do you increase your returns? How do you become wealthier? Great, that's a fantastic topic. That's an important part. But all wealth is what you have minus what you want. And I'm sure everyone listening knows. Two types of people. One who is very financially successful, objectively, but never feels like it's enough, and is not satisfied with what they have. Wakes up every morning saying this is not enough. Not necessarily a bad person. I am so grateful those people exist because that feeling of this is not enough, I need to do better, is the seed of all progress in society. If everybody woke up being totally satiated with what they've accomplished in life, we would have no progress ever. And so even when I point out that what may look like a character flaw, I'm so grateful that the whole world by and large has that feeling of this is not enough. But I think people also know people who are not necessarily that successful financially, however you want to define that, but they're totally content with what they have. They're absolutely happy with their family and going for walks and watching the sunset and walking their dogs and reading good books and whatever it might be, having conversations with their friends. They love that and they have a wonderful life. And I think you had sort of alluded to this, that parts of the book that I had touched upon lightly in previous books. I tried to go deeper in this. I wrote this book because I needed it for myself. I needed this book for me. And it was this realization a couple years ago of, if you had asked me 5 years ago, what is my investing philosophy? I could talk your ear off for hours about how I think about risk and volatility and whatnot. But if you said, what is your spending philosophy? What is like my real, like personal finance philosophy? I had nothing for you. I couldn't really tell you. And so I needed to kind of dive into my own life and figure out these topics for myself. And that balance between, do I want to be a never enough person where I want to wake up every day and say, no matter what I have done or how much I've made, the correct amount is more. Do I want to be that person? Or do I want to be someone who is just like, life is great and I have everything that I need right now. I do not need any more whatsoever. I think I battled that in my own life, trying to figure it out. And then always with writing, I just take a leap of faith. If I've dealt with these problems, other people probably have as well. And so let me just write a book about stories that I think are interesting, about a topic that I think is interesting. And if other people might like it and latch onto it, wonderful. But I wrote this book for me.
Yesterday, Shadi Hamid was on Interintellect. I was hosting that salon as well, and he was talking about how, if somebody writes a book about happiness, it's not because the author is happy, it's because the author needs 300 pages to think about this because it's a
Yeah.
problem for them. We all self-help book is called self-help because it's for the author.
Yes,
Trying
exactly.
to,
Right.
to help
Right.
themselves. What do you think? I mean, I'm in my early 40s, and my fellow elderly millennials are just approaching this point. that you so clearly define in your book when you find out which version you are. And you write beautifully about how, I think it's a Rick Rubin quote that real depression comes after your dreams have come true. And I distinctly feel that when I was 30 years old, I lost everything. So I grew up very privileged, and then I had like a sequence of family crises and catastrophes and immigration. And I literally started my life from zero when I was 30. So like imagine me, 2 suitcases, a bunch of books, I was very well known from a very well known family, but in a small country that nobody truly cares about. So this was a complete tabula rasa. And so I went through the different types of misery. The first misery is just like, oh my God, shit, I don't have anything.
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember this moment. I was back in Budapest. I gave a talk at this super fancy conference by the Lake Balaton. They sent a driver for me. I arrived. I give the talk. They send me back to London, and I land in London. And then I'm like sitting in the bus stop at 6 a.m. waiting for the bus and back to being a nobody. And it almost felt Disney-esque,
Yeah.
And so I definitely felt how different that kind of frustration, where you're just like grounding yourself, is from when you are actually thrust into you mentioned C.S. Lewis's excellent and famous essay, The Inner Circle, when you feel like you're kind of on the boundaries of that magic realm, and those frustrations or those types of depression are much heavier. Like there
Yeah.
you really face who you are. And people,
Right.
find out when they are close to having something, whether they will be a never enough kind of guy or not. So what was it for you in your life when you felt, oh my God, now, the machine will give me either a 1 or a 2 and I will know?
I heard this joke from the comic Jimmy Carr not too long ago. This is not in the book. And he said, most people in their 20s, they worry about what other people think of them. And then they're in their 30s, they mature and they say, I don't care what anybody thinks of me. And then in their 40s, they finally realize the truth, which was nobody was thinking about you to begin with all along. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think that was, I feel like that tracks in my own life very much, that a lot of what people consider a midlife crisis, however you want to define that, would be, is people finally realizing that like you're in this alone. Nobody's paying attention to you as much as you are. You're in this game for yourself. You might as well try to figure out your own way to do it. And I think I think a lot of people will go through that in life. I think that's always been the case, but social media makes it 100 million times more potent and more powerful than it's ever been, because the feeling of needing to perform for strangers, again, has always been there, but it is the core of life for young people in their teens and 20s, putting on a performative act on social media every day for a group of, by and large, strangers. If you're just trying to go viral, that's not part of their life. That is their life. And so it's so much broader now than it's been. I think in many ways, the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early, that kind of got its seeds after the financial crisis of 2008, when the economy was really weak, the unemployment rate was really high. It sparked this questioning in a lot of people's minds of like, what am I really trying to do here? Am I trying to maximize income and maximize savings, or am I trying to maximize life? And so that was a big movement that came out of that. And I think in many ways, COVID had a similar impact on a lot of people. Of after you've been locked inside for 2 years and desocialized in many ways and forced online to where Instagram and TikTok were your entire life 24/7, you kind of get sucked into the performative online game. And then maybe now in the last couple of years, there's a flush out of that, of a lot of people being like, is this really it? Is this really the life that we're going after? There has to be something else better than this that we're chasing. And so everyone will deal with that in their own little unique way. But the idea that you brought up earlier, that I think is a lot of core of this, is that there's 2 ways to use money. One is as a tool to live a better life and to actually make yourself happier and to do things that are going to give you and your family a better life. The other is as a yardstick of social status to measure yourself against others by. That's not always negative. I think in many ways it's unavoidable. Life in many ways is a competition for other people, and using money as a yardstick of where you sit on that hierarchy. Of course, there are incredible downsides to that, but I think it's just an unavoidable part of how the world works. But just asking yourself the question when you're spending money, are you doing this because it gives you a better life, or are you doing this as a status metric to compare yourself against others by? I think is always important.
I love this sentence in the book where you're like, be proud of the inside of your house, not the outside.
That's
As
right.
Christmas is coming up, I'm sure a lot of families will rewatch The Grinch. It's this whole idea, right? That it's not about like flexing with your, whether that's the roses in American Beauty or the holiday decorations in The Grinch, whatever is going on. Like have something inside that makes outside people's opinion meaningless, especially because they don't have enough information.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think we massively overestimate how much admiration we get from strangers. And the idea that if you people are going to look at my car, they're going to look at my clothes, they're going to look at my jewelry, they're going to look at my house. The answer is no, they're not. They're busy worrying about themselves. And so the idea of which would I rather have? The attempt, the misguided, I think, attempt to get strangers to turn their head and look at me, or
Mm.
be a good dad, be a good husband, be a good friend. It's so obvious when you frame it like that. And so if money is a tool to
Yeah.
do either of those things, it's a tool to either try to get people's attention or to be better, happier, more content at the things that are going to actually give you meaning and happiness and contentment in life. Which of those would you rather have? And there's nothing in this book that is against spending. I love nice things. I love nice cars and nice homes, like all of it. There's no plea in here to live like a monk and don't try to have any of the nice stuff in life. It's not that whatsoever. But I think if you always ask yourself what the purpose of this is, and I think I have to remind myself of this almost daily. It's not intuitive whatsoever. Like humans are wired very effectively for social status and for social hierarchy climbing. Like we are, it's one of the things that we're just so innate and so incredibly good at doing that. And so it's almost a constant daily reminder to yourself, even if you have been thinking about this topic for a very long time, the pull towards wanting to climb the social ladder and try to impress strangers who are not even paying attention to you is always there. It's always ever present.
A very good friend of mine, Natasha Zhukovsky, the novelist, she actually wrote a book called The Portrait of a Mirror, which is highly Girardian and very, very much about status. I really recommend reading it. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. And she and I, we always have these conversations about status and how status is a little bit like second best to love. And when first people want love from their parents, from their family, from their friends, and when that effort meets its first obstacles, people think, oh, I can like bypass this,
Yeah.
raise in
Yeah.
status, and then they will love me more. You even talk about like furniture and buying nice things and how even that is just like, hey, pay attention to me, admire me. It's rarely about it's rarely about the furniture, whether that's the story of your the guy in the LA restaurant who bought the $21,000 chair that freaked you out
Right.
when you were 19 because you're supposed to do that. You quote Warren Buffett, who says at some point that he's old enough now to know that the real measure of a quality of the quality of your life is how many people love you,
Yeah.
because that's something you can't buy. You can't give somebody $1 million. Many try, and many people
Yes.
will lie that thank you for the money, I love you now, but it's not really true. There's a beautiful story about money and children being a very complicated affair. But even when children seem to be wanting money many, many times even underneath that,
They just want your attention. They just want your attention to it. Look, what I'm about to say is not black and white. There are many exceptions to this, but most of the time, if you wake up in the morning and you are well loved and admired by your spouse, your children, your community, your coworkers, you enjoy your work, you're in good health, you sleep 8 hours, you have a clear conscience. Most of the time, if you check those boxes, your desire for very nice, fancy things is not that high. Again, there are exceptions to that. There are people who just love the craftsmanship and the engineering of Ferraris, and they're doing it for that reason. But I do think most of the time, when you see someone that has a very high propensity to spend and to show off with very nice things, not always, but much of the time, it is making up for they could not achieve the respect and admiration from the more durable qualities of
mm,
your spouse, your friends, your children, whatnot. If you can't achieve it from that, it's very common to then reach for the next best lever, which is if nobody loves me for my intelligence and my humor and my love, then maybe they'll love me for my car. Maybe they'll love me for my jewelry and my necklace and whatnot. That's a very real thing that happens. And there's no formula for when that's happening or how exactly to spot it. But I think it's you see it enough if you dig into a lot of these people, and the opposite of that, the people who do make a lot of money. They are quite wealthy, but they have such amazing marriages, such amazing relationships with their friends and their children. They're in good health. Their communities admire them. And those people, even when they are wealthy, don't live big, ostentatious lives. And there are plenty of people like that. So again, that's not black and white, but you see that very often, that if you can't receive your love and admiration from the people who you want to love and admire you, then you try to seek it from strangers. And the way you're going to try to seek it from strangers is through your flashy material stuff.
It's a little bit dangerous as well. I always think that this is why U2 haven't made a good album in so many decades, because they are just too happy.
I think that's a
They have
fascinating
beautiful
thing.
children, loving spouses, enough money to live forever. Why
Yeah, I think
rock and roll?
we could come up with examples, counter examples of this. Maybe Taylor Swift is one, but I think it's right that a lot of
Nobody wants
artists.
Taylor Swift to marry happily. Like we want,
That's
as a person, yes, but as an artist, no. Like we want,
no,
we want
exactly.
the eggs.
But I think it's very true. A lot of artists, whether it's an author or a painter or a musician, do their best work when they're angry
Yeah.
or in some kind of pit of life. I think that tends to be the truth. I think Chris Rock talked about this. He said, anybody who thinks for a living is bound to be depressed.
Yeah.
Anyone, so whether you're an author or a famous comedian, whatever it might be, if you spend your day thinking about humanity, you're bound to be kind of bummed out about it. And so, but that's what those are the people who end up doing the best work.
Yeah. And it's same for startup founders. As you started talking, I was like, my investors don't want me to be too happy. I sometimes feel like I'm not greedy enough for a startup founder, because I'm
Yeah.
like, at the end of the day, there are public libraries in New York City and I can go there for free. So what can happen? It's like, I'm
Yeah.
good. But, people who have bet on you, they want you to be a little bit frustrated and always want more. And you better find something. I think at least this is my, you talk about independence and purpose. This is like the purpose territory. You better find something that's not money, that keeps you going into retirement and maybe beyond, because otherwise
Yeah.
it'll just become boring.
And I think that's true. And again, there's also this weird paradox of the reason we have amazing medical technology and digital technology and everything that we have made major progress in all of humanity is because people woke up in the morning with a feeling of this is not enough. They woke up anxious and feeling like this is not. And so I am 100% confident that 100 years from now, my grandkids our grandkids will be living in a world where it is much better than it is today in terms of medical technology and various technologies, because there are so many people, even who are wealthy beyond imagination, the Musks, the Zuckerbergs in the world, who still wake up every morning and say, this is not enough.
There's something you've raised in the book that to me was very interesting, and then you don't fully wrap it up. And I don't know if it's because you want to keep us hanging and buying your next book, or it's because you are also on the fence about it. And that's a quote, or that you kind of lift out of and then discuss from Benjamin Franklin, who says that you can't really be much admired as long as you are envied, but that it's really hard to know when admiration kind of tips into and how to stop. Like, does somebody have control over that? Is this why Elon Musk always complains? He doesn't want people to, like, nobody really envies Elon Musk, right? So he won.
Yeah.
How should a normal person within the confines of normal life go about this?
Yeah. So it's like in the pursuit of admiration, if I do this thing, achieve this success, have this house, have this car, whatever it might be, different for everybody, in the pursuit of admiration, it's very difficult to know if people are admiring you or if they're envious of you. And I think it's extremely difficult to know what kind of attention you're getting from people. But admiration can be useful. Envy is always a liability overhanging your head. It's always like that. I remember this. I've told so many stories about when I was a valet, when I was at the hotel. I worked there from when I was like I guess 18 to 22. That was the age I was there. And if there be people coming in a Rolls Royce and or that kind of thing, to the extent that I would stop and look at them, sometimes it would be two feelings that I would generally have. One is I would imagine myself being them, and that, like, I couldn't give two shits about them, but I was like, if I was them, then people would care about me. Or maybe on my more cranky days, I would be like, you think you're better than me because you have a better car? You think you're better than my dad who's a hard working salt of the earth guy. You think it was this like, and this is a character flaw. This is not a good thing, but it was this sense of envy that hit me. But I guarantee you, the person driving in that car who gets out of the car and notices that everybody's looking, thinks that everyone's admiring them, but they're actually envious of them, and that always comes back to bite you. So it's very difficult to figure it out. This is a thing I wrote in the book that's been written about many times before, called the reverse obituary, which is this mental exercise where the exercise is write what you want your obituary to say today. If you like, what is your dream obituary? That when you pass away, your obituary comes out. What do you want it to say? And then the exercise is try to live your life up to that. And that's what the exercise is. But I think for most people, it's gonna be different for everybody. But for mine, I would want it to say, Morgan was a good husband, a good father, a good author. He helped his community. He was a good friend, like things like that. Nobody in that situation would talk about the square footage of their house or how many carats their ring had. Nobody, like so many of the things that we actually pursue would not make it into the list of things that you actually want to be known for. And so that idea, David Brooks called it eulogy virtues versus resume virtues. Resume virtues are your GPA and your SAT scores. Eulogy virtues are he was a great friend, he was a great worker, he was a great spouse, a great parent, etc. And so I think living up to those ideas, because the eulogy virtues are what you are admired for. The resume virtues are what you tend to be envied for.
I didn't know about the Brooks adage, and it was fascinating. It really made me think, and how much, my friends who are parents also struggle with teaching this to their kids, that there will be a world that will require these resume virtues of them, right? And you have to somehow, pick up the pace of traffic when you're driving the metaphorical car here and play the game, but that those are not real. And
Yeah.
that some of the things that we try to teach children are really the eulogy virtues. And we need to teach the marshmallow test in a way that this is not something that will pay out necessarily in the short term. Maybe it never actually pays out, and that's not why you do it. We're not good friends because we expect something in return. There's a
Yeah.
there's inherent value versus kind of instrumental value to being a good member of a community and having a life of the mind.
Somebody was talking about this recently. Andrew Ross Sorkin of the New York Times just came out with a book called 1929 about the crash of 1929, just before the Great Depression. And someone brought up a point that I thought was really fascinating, which is all of the big characters of that era of the Roaring Twenties, the richest people in the world, the CEOs of the banks, none of them are remembered anymore. Like nobody remembers them. Like Charlie Mitchell, all these people, these were the titans of the day, and that nobody remembers them anymore. And I think part of the reason why that might be is because all they did was make money. The only thing that they did was make a lot of money and live in big homes, and nobody will be remembered for that. And to the extent that we do remember some of these people, like Charlie Mitchell and whatnot, it's a sense of envy, or not envy, but looking down upon them for the chaos that they caused. And then, so who could be remembered from those eras? If it is a wealthy person, is someone who is probably remembered for their philanthropy, like Rockefeller, those kind of people, Carnegie, those kind of people, or someone like Winston Churchill, whatnot, who did things that were not just about attention seeking for themselves. It was helping other people, even if they had all of their flaws, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that idea of the people who are just seeking resume virtues will not be remembered at all, like barely even by their own family members. The people who, but I think so many of us have a great grandfather who is just like a legend of lore, even if they were not that successful, that not financially successful. There's so many stories about what they did and who they helped and whatnot. That's what actually gets you remembered over time.
That is absolutely fascinating, and so true. And I can see in the eyes that everybody remembers their great grandfather or great grandmother, or somebody who was larger than life, and who, through whom we learn that we are capable of more. I'm going to open the floor in a second for questions. And guys, you can raise your hand. You can also share a question in the Zoom chat if you want, and we can go to you later. But before we go there, I would like to just ask a final question, Morgan, and that's the question of social debt. I felt that there are three key terms in this book: independence, psychological wealth, and social debt.
Yeah.
By the way, and also before we open the floor, the list of how to be miserable, there's a list in the book of how to feel terrible in the long term. I love that so much. And as an Eastern European, we call this literature. There are frequent Nobel Prizes for this genre. So I especially appreciate that it shows up in an American investment book or financial wisdom book. Absolutely. So let's talk about social debt, which seems to be the key to how to be miserable. What is this? How should we think about it? And what might differentiate this from just like deathbed regrets, which we might be, reading everywhere about on the internet?
Yeah. Social debt is a term that I came up with, which is when the money that you have influences other people's perception of you or your own expectations in ways that are a debt, a liability in your life. And so, I mean, a like very extreme example that I used are the huge number, the huge percentage of lottery winners who either go broke or are clinically depressed after they win. And a lot of the reason why that is because when you win the lottery, everybody comes out of the woodwork asking, begging, at your knees, groveling for money, for handouts. And that, and
Yeah,
it's,
Chris Rock talks about how everybody calls him to ask for $2,000 and he never understands why it's $2,000. There has to be something about that.
it seems like a small enough amount that he can give away, but it's a meaningful enough in your life. I wrote about this experience I had. This was probably 2020, 2021. I did a group very, very similar like this, but it was in person with a group of NBA rookies. And the idea was, hey, talk to these rookies because they have such a high degree, a high percentage of going bankrupt. Everyone knows that with pro athletes. They make $20 million when they're 22 years old and they're bankrupt by 30. That's a very common path for these people. Try to talk some sense into them. And one of the rookies, he was 19. He brought up this idea that I thought, or this point that I thought was so wise for someone his age. And he said, the reason so many athletes like him go bankrupt is not because they spent all of their money on themselves, on their own mansion. It's because they had so much pressure to buy their fifth cousin, who they didn't even know, a small house. It was not because they bought themselves a big house. It was because they had so much social pressure to buy everybody who they knew a house, a car, financial security. And when you grew up in inner city poverty, that pressure is completely overwhelming. And he said, look, when you signed a $10 million contract, that is not your money. He was like, that is mom's money, dad's money, grandma's money, cousin's money, friend's money, high school principal's money. Everybody that you know is going to come asking for their little piece. And you cannot tell them, hey, I got mine. I'm going to go buy my Bentley and live in a mansion. Good luck to you all. You can't do it. So he was like, look, the amount of social debt that young athletes have is off the charts. And when you sign a $10 million contract, it comes with $20 million of social debt or whatever it might be. And it's not actual debt. It's not actually a loan, but it has the same purpose of like having to be repaid before you can enjoy any of this. And I think even in non-extreme examples in people's own lives, when they get a raise in their job, let's say their salary goes up by $10,000, if their expectations in their own head might go up by $15,000. Hey, now that I got a raise, we need to move to the other community. We need to take nicer vacations. We need to do this. It's a shifting of expectations that is its own debt, its own liability that has to be paid. And I think those liabilities are enormous. They're huge. And because they're not actual real debts, they're easy to ignore, but they're very real. It's a psychological debt that has a big impact on people's well-being when they're dealing with money.
You talk about Ellen de Botton in the Status Anxiety book, in your book. But Ellen de Botton also said something that I often think about, and as a boss running a company, dealing with other people's careers and kind of getting an insight into, this thing that happened clearly in America around, birth years 1995, 96. That, if I hire somebody who's older than that, they will have a different set of behaviors. And it's really palpable and a completely different. I mean, you write about this, you've written about this for many, many years, how, surviving the Great Depression completely changed people's, tolerance of risk. And that these are age cohorts with very different sets of traumas, expectations, self-image, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just, to me, it's absolutely fascinating how how you actually can have a gigantic generational gap when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, I think every generation is scarred and influenced in their own little ways. And a lot of debate in society in general, when you look at other groups of people and say, why do you behave like that? How could you possibly believe that? Why could you, like, what makes you think that? a lot of what the question that you should be asking is, what have you experienced that made you think that? And if I experience the same thing, would I believe the same thing as well? And so the idea of like, you look at different generations and how they think about topics, even just racism, things like that. The question is not why do you believe that? It's what did you experience and grow up with? What were the norms of your era that caused you to believe that? And I think it is foolish for people to think for any topic, whatever this might be, whether it's money or anything else, that if you didn't grow up in a different situation, in a different country, in a different generation, to different parents in a different part of the country, that you would not have fundamentally different beliefs than you do right now. Everybody wants to think that they are thinking independently and thinking about the world, just soaking up the information of the world and creating a mental model of the world based off of how it actually works. But we're so heavily influenced by our own unique pasts, the vast majority of which were out of our control, being where and when and to whom we were born. And so I think when you come to terms with that, it gives you a little bit more empathy for other people. It makes you less cynical about other people's decisions of how they might be living their lives, or how they earn their money, how they spend their money, how they invest their money. One of the criticisms of my first book, The Psychology of Money, was, Morgan, what you're saying might be true for a college-educated white American male, but it's not true for me in Zimbabwe, for me in China, for me in South Africa, whatever it might be. And my response to that was like, yes, I'm guilty of charge. Like I'm as influenced as this as anybody would be, and so are you. Nothing is more persuasive than what you have experienced firsthand. You can read about other people's experiences, you can try to empathize with them, but nothing will be as persuasive to you in terms of building your mental model of how the world works as what you have experienced yourself firsthand.
And I mean, you write beautifully about like not understanding somebody's behavior just means you don't have enough information.
Yeah,
All behaviors make sense if you have done your research. But in Alain de Botton, this would be his idea of self-sabotage, right? That you have the social debt where the young NBA player is suddenly very rich, has to pay off an extended family, everybody's loans, college loans, car loans, mortgage, medical bills, whatever is happening. And on the other end is Botton's maybe a little bit more European and resigned take, which is the self-sabotage, where somebody stops themselves from rising because they don't want to alienate their environment. They don't want to make their partner feel bad, their friends feel bad. They don't want to lose friends. And I would imagine that what I might have noticed with regard to some like job applicants, who are between millennial and Gen Z, is a tendency away from status signaling to lack of status signaling.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's like the idea
like, oh, I have $1,000. I'm going to go to the spa and take a lot of photos. And a Gen Z person would just like not even tell anybody about it because they don't want their housemates to feel bad or something.
Yeah, I think that this might be wrong, but I think the idea that the baby boomer generation was probably the most eager to display their wealth, and millennials started pulling back, and I think Gen Z has pulled way, way back from it. And I think it's just moved towards other areas of social status signaling. For baby boomers, it was a McMansion. That was how you signaled your status. For millennials, I don't know what it would have been, but I think for Gen Z, it's followers on TikTok and things like that. It's how many retweets did your last hot take get? That's how they signal their status. And when you are getting your status from that, nobody cares that Mr. Beast wears a dirty t-shirt. That's not where the status comes from now. He has 500 million followers or whatever. That's where you get your status. And so I think that it's just we've shifted the metrics of what our status would be, and I think that's. But
it's as important. It's as important. It's just maybe less legible for older generations because we count our wealth in a different way.
Yeah, and I think maybe for the greatest generation, it was like how many military honors you had and how many kids you had. It was just a very different metric of how you measured your success. But whatever it might be, there's always a status-seeking environment of trying to insert yourself on the ledger of where you are relative to other people.
And do you think that because I often feel that when millennials are changing, it's just age. So all generations start in this very different configuration, this different like historical determinism, different economies, different types of media telling them different things, different education, lack thereof or overabundance thereof. And then at some point, everybody turns 40 if they are lucky, and they will have the same problems. And maybe this is where the Buffett idea of lovability that you so beautifully write about comes into play, that you can start with followers, you can start with military honors, you can start with how many sheep you have, whatever you started with as a young person to try to like maximize your professional and mating status. And then at the end of the day, it's like, do my kids like me? Do
Yes,
you
that's
agree
like
with that?
that's the Buffett idea of like the ultimate success in life is when the people who you want to love you do love you. And I think it may like so the point may be regardless of which generation it is or what culture you're from, that's the final boss that everybody gets to. And they probably get to that in their 40s or 50s. And maybe getting to your 40s and 50s and realizing that you don't have that is the seed of a lot of midlife crises. And then you start kind of flailing, like trying to be like, no, okay, well, I don't have that, so maybe I can get my love and attention from somewhere else. I need to change my careers. I need to get divorced. I need to buy a red sports car, whatever it might be, because you reach that final boss of like, this is obviously what I want, what is going to feed my soul and make me happy, and you can't get there until the middle later stages of life because we are so primed early on in life when we don't have a lot of tangible skills and haven't really figured out a lot of things in life. We are so good at that age in your 20s and your 30s to signal your status with whether it is material possessions or social media followers, things that are much more tangible and are much more externally faced, comparing yourself to others. Whereas you ultimately get to a point where you're like, the comparison game to others is futile. And it doesn't really matter that much. All I really care about is like, does my wife love me? Do my kids admire me? And so I think, yeah, that's the ultimate stage that everybody gets to.
How do you think, there are these millennial hordes who are not getting married, who are not having babies. So we will have basically half of the generation either living more solitary lives, or like coming to family formation much later. Do you think this changes the nature of these midlife crises? Do you see maybe the great resignation and other like career blow-ups as a kind of response to that? Like if I can't measure my midlife self-worth and kind of metaphysical success on my non-existent children because they are not there, will I measure it on my career satisfaction? Do you see that there is some relationship with like fertility rates and types of midlife crisis here and purpose?
I can only speak about it from my own perspective, although I imagine this is not uncommon for parents that as soon as I became a parent, it was instantaneous that my measure of success in life shifted from how well I'm doing to how well my kids are doing. And there's a saying that like when you become a parent, it's a medical procedure in which your heart is transplanted outside of your body into somebody else. And I think that's really what it is. You stop chasing your own status and it just becomes, for other people. And so it felt like not that long ago that inside my own head was, how do I get into a good college and get good grades? And now it's a lot of what I think about is like my own kids' education, my own kids' path into that. You just shift it from yourself onto other people. And, I mean, it's a heavy topic of what happens if you don't ever have that. If you don't ever, obviously, there's lots of people who never have kids that live very good, great, happy lives. There's millions of those people, but I think every parent will empathize with the idea that like shifting the light from yourself onto other people is the highest highs and the lowest lows. It can give you indescribable joy and meaning and purpose, but also indescribable anxiety and fear and worry all at the same time. This is maybe a slightly different question and topic that you asked, but to me, so much, and it's such a complicated equation of why people are having fewer kids now than they used to. But one element of it that I think probably doesn't get enough attention. I tweeted this the other day. I think every societal problem right now is downstream of housing affordability. And it is so common among young people that you want to check a series of boxes in life. And one of those boxes that a lot of people want to check before they get married and have kids is, do I own a house? And it's huge. And to the extent that you can't do that, we have someone in our own town. I'll try not to give away too much information on who it might be, but she's 28 years old. She has a great job. Her husband has a great job. They're recently married. They're wonderful, wonderful people. And in Seattle, a cheap, tiny starter house costs $2 million in Seattle. And so they're like, well, forget about it. There's no way they can afford a house. And so they have explicitly made the decision to not have kids indefinitely. And it's just like, you see this in any other era, they would have 2 or 3 kids and be wonderful parents and pillars of a society. And they want kids. It's their decision to have kids, but they feel like because housing is where it is, they just can't, they're just stalled at that level of progress. And I think that's a real issue. And when people talk about housing policy, it's not housing policy, it's family policy. It trickles down to so many different things from there that plays a huge role in that.
I completely agree with this. And this is happening in Europe as well. So it's starting to happen elsewhere as well. This is not just downstream of like American zoning laws and, the credit bubble. Carl, you have your hand up.
Yes, I was asked. So first, thanks for having this, Morgan. I've enjoyed all of your books. So I'm in my 40s and still looking for my life partner. So fingers crossed. A lot of advice around finances seems to look at the idea of legacy flowing through children. I've decided that I don't want to have children. With that in mind, how might I or others in my situation think about spending as it ties to legacy, meaning, memory, and so on?
It's obviously a very personal and individual decision. I think there's no right way to do this. I'll give you some personal insight that I have. I actually don't know what he would be. I think he's my dad's second cousin. I think that's who he is. Some semi-distant relative who is similar to you, and he's very financially successful. He's probably in his 60s, has no kids, made quite a bit of money. And so what he has done is he's gone to virtually everyone that he knows, friends and family, and you say, hey, let me give you $25,000 for you to give to charities of your choice. You can do anything what you want with it within your own town. There's no strings attached to this. Here's $25,000. My only ask is that you give it to a charity, a foundation of your choice. And it's the coolest thing. And everyone, so he's given that to my parents and they've donated within their individual towns. It's the coolest thing that they do. And that for someone who doesn't have heirs of his own, direct heirs, but has made a lot of money, I know it's given him incredible satisfaction to do it. And he could have just given the money away himself, but by tying in other people who are his friends and family into it, I think it's given him a deeper, richer sense of legacy than if he had done it himself. There are obviously many different ways to do that, but that's a recent thing that pops into my head of someone who did it in a unique and creative way.
Thank you.
Yep.
I love this. Any other questions in the room, guys? Yeah, Camilo, hi, great to see you. How are you doing? I loved your commentary in Zoom.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I couldn't figure out how to raise a hand in Zoom.
Golly. So if you don't know these guys, you just go to reactions. And then if you click on it, one of the options that pops up will be the hand raise feature. But I'm also looking at your through my camera. So if you're doing this, I will also see it and come to you.
Go
ahead, Camilo, and then John.
So, Maury, really appreciate both your books.
Hang on. First Camilo, and then Jonathan.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just to respect the genealogy here.
No, thanks, Anna. Maury, thanks for being here. I think you inadvertently wrote the best self-help book I've read this year, even though it was deliberately not that, and you don't write like that. So, but that was kind of like the feeling after reading it. One thing that felt like where I kind of wanted to hear more, and we touched on it in this session, is the idea of spending money on courtship, because we talked about like if what really matters is the legacy, the love you get from your spouse, your children. I think something that I felt maybe was understudied in the book is money and relationships, romantic relationships, have a correlation. Sometimes it becomes caricature as to like, oh, women are gold diggers and men have to be rich, and like that obviously like misses the whole plot. But I do think, and Scott Galloway put it in a very elegant way, that his theory is that women are, and I'm talking about heteronormative relationships, that women are not necessarily looking for wealth, but the promise of future resources, right?
Yeah.
And competency, and I found that very interesting. But and I live in Seattle, right? So like, in a way, it's like I don't want to live in that cycle of status of like, let me live in a penthouse in downtown Seattle or like a fancy apartment in South Lake Union. I know what I want, and it's a different type of lifestyle. At the same time, quote unquote, I'm in competition with people at some of these companies. Well, I used to work in tech company, but a lot of these people that have a lot of resources that can signal immediate and more future resources.
Yeah.
And to be honest, there's a part of me where it's like, am I playing this game for virtue, but in doing that, making the trade-off of really limiting who I can find as a romantic partner here. And there's this weird tension I can't figure out. And in the book, it felt a bit underexplored. So I wanted to see if you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, and great question. Thank you. It might be underexplored in the book because I don't know if I have a lot of tangible points to this. It's a very individualistic thing. There's a book that I read a year ago called The Evolution of Desire, which talks about it's a kind of a self-explanatory title, but it made the point that you just made as well, which is that from an evolutionary point of view, the ability to have resources in the future can be more attractive than having resources today. It used the example of in the book of a medical school student might be a more attractive mate than a current wealthy doctor. Like the signaling of future resources is actually what is really desired there as well. I'm trying to think of another example that I have. This is a very extreme example, but sometimes those make the best points. I met a family a couple years ago that are multi-billionaires, and I was having dinner with the grandchildren who were 19 to 25 years old in that zone. And one of the things they said, and these kids have unbelievable life. They have access to unlimited money. They live the most amazing lives you can imagine. And they're all incredibly good looking. This is just like out of Hollywood of this, like the luckiest people in the world. And they made a point.
And you love them. You love them because you are an evolved being and you're like, despite this.
But here's what's so interesting about it. And I really had a lot of empathy for them. They all talked about how it's nearly impossible to date. It's nearly impossible for them. And the reason why, and I understand why the family did this, is that when they're dating somebody, whenever it gets to a certain point in the dating point, they sit down with the parents and the grandparents and the lawyers, and lawyers say, if you marry into this family, you will be met with the most ironclad prenup that has ever been written. And if anything happens, you will get $0 and 0 cents whatsoever. And I understand why the family does that, but it creates this incredible tension in these young relationships. And to date, all of them have just kind of petered out from there. And so I guess like the real world lesson from that
but also it's kind of a dick move. Like,
yes, but I understand why.
For a while, the other person should not get 0, whatever happens.
I don't disagree with that. I also understand why a family who has generational wealth, that this has been wealth in the family for more than a century, and it is so incredibly common. The story of the wealth was ultimately taken down by a series of bad marriages. So I understand why they do this, but I think the real world point of this is like, any relationship that just has its foundation in money is bound to fail. I mean, I think that's the obvious. And so I think if you can use your resources to be a better person, to control your time, to have independence so that you can spend time with people, be a good parent, be a good spouse, and use your resources for that rather than just, hey, we're going to live an amazing life, which is obviously going to peter out and get boring and old very quickly. I don't know if I have much else to say for that. It's probably a topic that I should think about more, and that's why it's probably underexplored in the book.
I love that. And I also feel like underneath the kind of competence to acquire future resources, through which I think women are not greedy, they just want to know that this is not necessarily going to be the major stressor of my life.
Yes.
Don't have money.
Right.
I mean, very few women grow up in families where there really is no money worry at all, right? We all come with a set of experiences into adulthood, some of which were stressing about money. And as much as I know very wealthy couples, they also have money stresses. They might be different from a working class family where there's a grandparent living with them and everybody's working 4 jobs. I think this is what, like, people try to like not have, like, it's the same idea as the prenup. You try to prevent future problems as much as you can because you have no real control over unexpected things in the future. So at least you feel like you've done your best now. And this is absolutely fascinating to me. And also goes back to the lovability question and the matter of independence. Because I think it's kind of like in physics, there's the difference between elasticity and flexibility. And what you want is the flexibility. So a medical student might be more attractive than a doctor who already is kind of unremovable from a certain position because there's optionality. And for the woman, this is an independence where we can at some point look at of course, this has very little to do with how actual medical professions work in the US these days, but that there is at least a couple of choices where the spouse might be able to participate in, like, which city we want to live in, who we want to be. And it goes down to creating situations where you are more independent than less. Jonathan, you had your hand up for a while. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, thank you. Morgan, I really enjoyed both your books, especially Psychology Money, but the new one's great as well. I am a family advisor to a family that's becoming, I would say, wealthy, and more just kind of advisor in general, right-hand man to the founder husband. And, it's one of those things. I've got a sophomore in college myself, a senior in high school, and then a freshman in high school. I think one of the interesting things my wife and I have done, I think a lot of the things you talk about from an independence perspective, I would say that we are wealthy in your definition of it, in the sense that, like, we're pretty close to being able to do what we want to do when we want to do it and how we want to do it. But a lot of that's just because we've tailored our lifestyle back a lot,
Yeah.
and we started early. I I think one of the things I struggle with a little bit, and I'm curious your thought on it, is so much of what we've done that has made us successful is that we started early on keeping lifestyle in rein, and then making small incremental, investments into savings and whatever else. And now we're in our mid 40s, like basically on the snowball is just kind of starting to really pick up. And now it's kind of like, oh, wow, you can kind of do what you want. I
Yeah.
couldn't do what I want had I not done a lot of the things I did 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so now people are like, oh, wow, like you've got this life. It's like you seem to have figured out the game. And I'm like, well, most of what I'm doing right now is actually because I did something 20 years ago.
Totally. Yeah.
And now so actually this weekend over Thanksgiving, the family who I'm a advisor to, not a financial advisor, just more of a right-hand man, is like, our daughters are asking, because they're in college, like, all right, what should I do and not do now that I'm a sophomore in college or whatever else? And I think I'm actually using your book, Psychology Money, Psychology of Spending Money, and then Remit Sethi's I Will Teach You to Be Rich,
Yep.
a couple other things to kind of say, like, okay, if nothing else, you live in America, like you are part of a family that is, upper middle class. In some ways, if you just do smart things and don't screw yourself over, to some extent, you'll be pretty good. But I'm curious on, how do you have any thoughts of, like, how to talk to young people? Because a lot of the decisions they make now really are the seeds of something, like Warren Buffett. Like, I think one of the things I really enjoyed about your first book, Psychology Money, is when you compared Warren Buffett versus some other very high
Jim
yield
Simons.
person who had like triple or quadruple the returns of
Yeah.
Buffett. Buffett just did it for so much longer, and time is like the thing you just can't beat. You just can't beat time. What, if you were in my shoes and like talking to these three teenage, or I guess early 20 girls now, like, more than anything, I'm just, don't move the goalpost, yada yada. But just interesting to, like, how do you break through to that generation, because they have likes and
Yeah. But
Yeah.
they're also extremely uncertain about the future, right? Like, we are dealing with the generation that don't expect the future to repeat some of the patterns that we had in the past. So
Yeah.
how do you prepare a generation for a future that they don't necessarily believe will exist?
Yeah, I think, and these are great questions, tough questions. There's a quote that I love from Charlie Munger. I've written about this before, where he says, "When you're teaching financial matters to young people, they either understand it instantly or never." And I think there's actually quite a bit of truth into that. The idea that a lot of these things, this is an unfortunate thing, but people either understand it innately, or they're not going to get it. And I don't think it's that black and white. There is a lot of information that you can give to these young people that will get through to them and change their habits. But I mean, for myself, and I'm sure sounds like this is the same for you and your wife. It just came naturally. It just felt like the right thing to do, that you should save and live below your means and live like that. I think to the extent that you can tell young people stories about money rather than lectures and formulas is where the education of finance to young people has really gone astray, is that it is taught in a manner that is indistinguishable from algebra or trigonometry or chemistry or whatnot. And in the mind of a 15-year-old or a 17-year-old, they're going to think about that. Because when you are 15 and you don't have any money, if you teach investing through, hey, memorize this formula for compound interest, or memorize the dividend discount model formula and regurgitate it on a test. And by the way, you don't even have any money yourself to put this to work. They don't think of it any differently than any other academic field that they're thinking about. But I think that's a shame and kind of a tragedy, is because there are an infinite number of amazing stories in finance, of people doing well, of people doing poorly, of people screwing up, of people regrets, of people living amazing lives that you can pull from. And so I think if you can teach money through the lens of behavior and psychology and storytelling, and completely ignore the math academic side of it, then you can get through to people. Because everybody knows, if you hear a good story when you're 5 years old, you remember it for life. But all of us remember back in college when we memorized the formula the morning of a test and forgot it 90 minutes later. And so I think that's when I think that's the way to do it. And there's so many of those stories out there to get through to that young mind. And the idea, you telling stories about how people created their own wealth, and these are average, ordinary, salt of the earth people who just live below their means and made some really basic decisions and invested for the long term and took control over their lives. And it sounds like you are in that position yourself. And that idea, because I think it's also common in culture, the idea that in order to become wealthy, you have to be on the inside. You have to be on the inside track. You have to know the right people. You have to go to the right schools and work at the right banks.
It's super expensive, right?
And I think that's right. And I think it's not true. I think it was true in different eras. Yeah. If this is the 1920s, that was absolutely true that you needed to do that. But we live in a world where finance has been democratized to such a degree that an average ordinary person can open up a Vanguard account and buy a low-cost index fund with $50. And if you have the psychology to hold that for 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years, you can and very likely will do incredible. And so telling stories around that, I think, is a way to get into the minds of young people, even if there is the asterisk that I started with of some people get it instantly and some people don't get it at all. And one of the very difficult things about today that was not even true 5 or 10 years ago is the extent to which young people are introduced to finance through Robinhood day trading or sports betting gambling that they throw into the investing bucket. And if that is your first experience with investing, it's very quick. It's very, just luck, chance driven. If that's your first experience with it, it can be harder to teach those people about, hey, if you own a diversified low-cost index fund for 40 years, you can build a lot of wealth, when they've been so preconditioned to just betting on tonight's hockey game kind of thing. And so I think the earlier you can get to them with those lessons about real investing, real wealth building, the better.
It's really interesting how my friend Shreyas has this blog post about how money is the new media. And so it's not just the gambling and the trading, again, meeting in the middle through these apps, but it's all public. So talk about trying to impress strangers. You're not even just hoarding. You're like hoarding in public, and it's a competition, and this kind of like intimate family building side of wealth building is completely lost.
Yeah, I think for a lot of young people, their Reddit crypto group is their family, is their social life, and and that's how they're building status. That's how they're building friends. And I understand and can empathize with, but it's a very different world when even 20 years ago, when I started investing, there was the day trading craze of the 90s, but it wasn't that big. It wasn't that serious. 20 years ago, if you wanted to learn about investing, you were pushed into like buying profitable companies and learning how to value them and owning them for decades on end. That was how young people were exposed to it. Completely and utterly different today.
Yeah. And you talked about some people actually like waking up to this not being enough, and they don't just want to play around with tokens. They might have some crypto on the side, but like that's not all of it. Paul Millard is often on Interintellect, author of The Pathless Path, like you can just be independent and like build a family and make money in an independent way. You don't have to be inside. You can live wherever you want. It feels like the low-hanging fruit of our era that not enough people are using.
Right.
And I love one of your recipes for becoming miserable is treating your investment decisions just as math, which I found hilarious. I remember in one of our first conversations, actually the very first time you and I spoke on the internet was when your first baby had just been born. I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was 6-7 years ago, something like that.
Yep.
And one of the questions I asked of you was about the quality of your writing, which I found to be exceptional. I still do. And I was almost asking for shortcuts. And then you were like, no, I just have written like 10,000 blog posts.
Right. That's good. I mean, that's it. I mean, it's the same in investing too. Like the secret is time. Time is always the secret. And I forget who said this, but there's a quote. I should know who said this, but it's like, nature is never in a hurry and it accomplishes the most amazing things. The most amazing features in the world come from nature, whether it's an oak tree or a glacier or whatnot. And the feature of nature is that it's never in a hurry. It can take hundreds and hundreds of years to build something, to grow something. It's never rushed. And I think you see that in so many endeavors in life, whether it's writing or investing or whatnot. The secret of how did you get so wealthy? How did you get so good? How did you get to do this is I've been doing it a very long time. No matter who you're talking to or who you ask a question, that's going to be the common denominator of their answer.
So we have independence, we have social debt, we have the idea of psychological wealth, and then you introduce also quiet compounding in the book, which is the stuff that nobody sees. And you know, your ability to tell these stories through your own compounding of talent and ability and agility ensures that we can tell these stories that people actually remember. Like how I remember your story about the Great Depression messing up everybody's risk aversion or risk tolerance. You wrote that, I don't know, 8 years ago, and I read it and I still remember.
Yeah.
Because it's a story, and it gives me that kind of scripture-like little capsule of truth that I can then recognize elsewhere in the world, and it helps me make better moral decisions.
But in school, we make these kids memorize the periodic table. It's just a very different way of teaching. And I think in every topic, but so many in money, there is an endless well of stories to tell. And I think it's like it's a tragedy of the education system that we teach kids in a way that they're not going to remember when there is an alternative of very memorable anecdotes and stories to base their learning around.
Yeah, and the great novels can also teach economics. I mean, we do salons about like how Middlemarch or, you know, Jane Austen's books are exceptional in their explanatory power of how like economy actually works in households. They are about money, like they're about marriage, so they are about money. And you know, if next generation won't be able to read long books, that affinity is also gone. Jabir, you will be our closing question. I think it's so fitting to go to a very young person because we were like talking about your generation for an hour and now you actually get a say about it. And you're an economist, so this is perfect. You will be our coda question. We have a couple of minutes left.
Perfect. Thank you, Anna, for like letting me attend. I really appreciate it. And Morgan, I'm like a huge fan, so this is absolutely an honor. And my question does pertain to young people. I don't know like if I should be called an economist. I'm absolutely not, by the way. My question is more so that like, I feel like at the age of 23, like you mentioned, every signal around me seems to like reward the outward markers of success, like chasing that prestigious title, like legible achievements, and like the instinct to measure myself against my peers, almost biological. Like I cannot help it. And I feel like from what your interviews I've listened to or like what you've said, correct me if I'm wrong, you only ended up at the Motley Fool because of the global financial crisis. Before that, you wanted to pursue private equity or like institutional finance. So like, is the secret just happy coincidences? Like, is there like a way to short circuit this feedback loop? Like, how do I be smarter about like looking inwards instead of outwards? Without like the hindsight, you know, like or like just to sum up my question, what would you tell yourself at 23?
No, it's such a good question. And I also think I was much more materialistic at 23 than I am today because I think I needed to be. I didn't have anything else to offer the world. I think that's really what it was. That's where I got the idea of talking about that in general, is because that was me. when I was 23, I didn't have any intelligence. I didn't know how to be a good friend. I didn't know how to be a good boyfriend. I didn't know how to do it. And I have no clue how to do any of that. And so naturally, and I think this is very common, it was, well, maybe if I have a Rolex, then I'll get attention. And the other guys too. But I think the older that you get, the less important then you get that becomes, because you start competing on other things like intelligence and wisdom and humor and all these other things as you get older. I guess the point in that is I don't look at young people chasing material status as a flaw at all. I don't necessarily regret doing it, even if I can look back and with a deeper perspective today than I had at the time. You're right that it's a competition. And I think sometimes at some points in your life, not all of them, but at some points in your life, you just have to recognize the rules of the game, even if it is a stupid and flawed and sometimes destructive game, that it's the game that's being played. And if you want to be competitive in that game that you're playing, you kind of have to play along with it. Now, you can always take that to extremes that you shouldn't go to, because a mate who is only attracted to your material possessions is probably heading down the wrong path to begin with. But I look, it changes throughout your life, and I don't regret that at all. And I would not dissuade my son when he's 23 from chasing that, because A, it might be right at the time, and B, maybe more important, you have to learn about the limits of that game and that strategy the hard way. And so, to the extent that I was more materialistic, and then I realized as I got older that it was not getting me what I thought it would. That's a lesson you have to learn the hard way, and it's an incredibly valuable lesson to learn. And I'm glad that I learned it, and I don't regret chasing it at that point in life. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess there's, like you said, no substitute for time.
Yeah.
There is one last question. What should the primary considerations be when making a purchase that would have been previously out of reach? Mackenzie, do you want to ask it quickly? And maybe Morgan will respond to it via email to me, and I will share it in the Discord. I just want to ensure that.
Yeah, of course. And I apologize. There's probably some background noise from our daughter.
That's good.
Who's here with us too. So for us, our household income has grown really significantly. We're 29, we own our house, our savings is in a great spot. So we're really happy with where we're at, but are still so focused, I think, on squirreling away funds that we experience a lot of guilt when it comes to purchasing things. And we really want to avoid lifestyle creep, to ensure that we can consider or continue to provide for ourselves, our daughter, and all of that good stuff. So that's where it's like, how can we minimize the guilt? I guess, what do we need to consider when we're making these purchases? And Carl, I loved your response of considering the FIRE versus FILE long-term goals, and we will dive into that more. But yeah, just wanted to kind of get your take on it.
One, it sounds like since you have great saving habits to begin with, you shouldn't feel any guilt or shame doing it and using the money that you've built up, and that sounds like you and your spouse have earned and deserve. You shouldn't feel any guilt into that. I think what I try to think about a lot is, what I'm trying to do is minimize regret in the future. I'm trying to minimize points at some point in the future, 10 years, 50 years from now, in which I'm going to look back and say, I wish I had done it differently. That was really a mistake and I didn't do it. And then always asking myself, how good am I at knowing what I'm going to regret today? So decisions that I made 10 or 20 years ago that I might regret today, did I know at the time that I was going to regret it, or did I think it was the right thing to do? Because most of the time when you're making a decision that you're going to regret, it feels amazing. It feels great, because the reason you're going to eventually regret it is because you are like front loading your pleasure at the expense of tomorrow. And so when you're doing it, it feels amazing. And so I always try to ask myself, like, I'm doing this thing that feels amazing. It feels like the right thing to do today. Does that increase the odds that I'm going to regret it at some point in the future? And always asking yourself of that. Now, I think most people, including maybe myself, don't have a very strong sense of what they're going to regret in the future. I think I'm getting better at it, but I think most people are not very good at it. And so I think it's just always a self-examination of how well I've done in the past. What do I regret today? Of course, I have regrets about things that I've done in the past. What were the signals at the time? Did I know at the time that this was a risk that I was going to regret? And how can I learn from that to try to make better decisions in the future? That's the very basic framework that I try to think about it in. It's very much a work in progress. But I think in general, you should not feel guilty about using the money that you've built up to live a good life, especially if it's for the betterment of your family and your children and whatnot.
Thank you.
I love that. Russ Roberts from Econ Talk has a wonderful book called Wild Problems.
Yeah.
I would deeply recommend it. First of all, it's just beautifully written, amazing stories in it. And he has this idea that wild problem is something that where you're making a decision that will change you in a way that you don't know what the future you will like. And it's very hard to make decisions for this expected new person. The person who has immigrated, who has married this person, who has had this baby, because you expect to change. And so how to make decisions for a future you that might be so different that you expect to potentially be extremely different from yourself. And he has a very good kind of philosophical framework for dealing with that level of uncertainty. And I love the regret minimization. I think if it's not overdone, I mean, Morgan, you talk about how many good things in life, from good medicine to a good glass of wine, are great in small doses, not good when done too much, too strongly. Regret minimization is like that as well. I have a personal adage for my own life, which is don't give yourself bad memories on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that I always find that works in so many different scenarios. So maybe this should be our takeaway. Just one last word, like what are you working on now? And what comes after this beautiful book of wisdom? What is something that didn't fit here and that will require a new book?
I don't try to force anything, so I don't have much pressure or desire to say, oh, what's next? I got to figure out the next one. Whenever it comes to me, it'll come to me. So I spend my day reading and hanging out with my kids and going for walks and whatnot. And whenever it comes to me, it'll come to me. But there's no timeline on what's next exactly.
I love this, and this goes to your independence plus purpose formula. Morgan Housel, thank you so much for being here with us today. We love your thinking. We love your writing. We learn so much from you every day on X, through your blog, through your books. I think when the next book comes to you, we will find out about it and you will be back with us. So until then, we will do our best and maybe come back to you with some life updates by then.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. And thanks for the great questions, everybody. And the
thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.